The time has come to start a new audiobook. It has been quite a while since I experienced The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, and I don't remember too much of it, so I'm not sure if this is going to be one of those audiobooks where I laugh at how broken it is, like the original Snow White, or if I laugh at how genuinely hilarious it turns out to be, like the original Winnie the Pooh. Before we begin, there's a few things to point out. The title of this video is probably going to say The Original Pinocchio. However, you can kind of argue that it's not the original Pinocchio. The original version of the original Pinocchio ended at one point, and then the same author made an extended version that continued on after that point. So this is arguably not the original, but it still contains the story of the original, and it's still the original author and everything. And also I want to point out that I'm not going to even try to emulate the voices from the Disney version of Pinocchio. My excuse is that the Disney version is not in the public domain. Chapter 1. Once upon a time there was a king, my little readers will immediately say. No, children, you are mistaken. Once upon a time there was a piece of wood. It was not a fine wood, but a simple piece of wood from the wood yard, the kind we put in stoves and fireplaces, so as to make a fire and heat the rooms. I do not know how it happened, but one beautiful day, a certain old woodcutter found a piece of this kind of wood in his shop. The name of the old man was Antonio, but everyone called him Master Cherry, on account of the point of his nose, which was always shiny and purplish, just like a ripe cherry. As soon as Master Cherry saw that piece of wood, he was overjoyed, and rubbing his hands contentedly, he mumbled to himself, "This table leg has come in good time. I will make from it a table leg. I'll make him a table he can't refuse." No sooner said than done. He quickly took a sharpened axe to raise the bark and shape the wood, but when he was on the point of striking it, he remained with his arm in the air, because he heard a tiny, thin voice say, I'm about to do Pinocchio's voice. As is common knowledge, Pinocchio is an Italian story, so for the man himself, I shall do an authentic Italiano accent. It's me, Pinocchio. Do not strike me so hard. Just imagine how surprised good old Master Cherry was. He turned his bewildered eyes around the room in order to see whence that little voice came. But he saw no one. He looked under the bench, and no one. He looked in a sideboard, which was always closed, and no one. He looked in the basket of chips and shavings, and no one. He opened the door in order to glance around his house, and no one. What then? I understand, he said, laughing and scratching his wig. I imagined I heard that voice. I will start to work again. He took up the axe, and again gave the piece of wood a hard blow. Ow, 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 ow. You have hurt me, cried the little voice, as if in pain. Yeah, as if in pain. You wouldn't just feel pain if someone took an axe to you, would you? Toughen up and get good, would you? This time Master Cherry became dumb, with his eyes nearly popping out of his head, with his mouth open wide, and with his tongue hanging down on his chin, like a gorgon head on a fountain. As soon as he could speak, he said, trembling and stammering from fright, But where does that little voice come from that says, Oh, there is nothing alive in this house? Can it be that this piece of wood has learned to cry and scream like a baby? I cannot believe it. This is an ordinary piece of wood for the fireplace, like all the other pieces with which we boil a pot of beans. What's next? What if there may be someone hidden inside? If there is, so much the worse for him. I will settle him. In saying this, he seized with both hands that poor piece of wood and knocked it around with pity against the stone wall of the room. Then he stopped to listen so as to hear if there was any voice that complained. He waited 2 minutes, and nothing. 5 minutes, and nothing. 10 minutes, and nothing. I understand, he said, forcing a laugh and rubbing his wig. I imagined that I heard a cry, oh, I will begin to work again. And because he was somewhat frightened, he tried to hum an air so as to make himself courageous. Meanwhile, he stopped working with the axe and took up a plane to make the wood even and clean. But while he planed, he heard again the little voice, this time in a laughing tone. "Stop! You are taking the skin off of my body." I might have gotten a little bit of Jamaican in my Italian there. It was sort of hard to control that with a laughing tone. This time, poor Master Cherry fell down as if shot. When he opened his eyes, he found himself sitting on the ground. His face appeared transfigured, and the end of his nose, which was always purple, became blue with great fear. Chapter 2. At this moment, there was a knock at the door. "Come in," said the woodcutter without having strength enough to arise. Then a lively old man called Geppetto entered the room. The boys in the neighborhood, when they wished to make him angry, called him cornmeal, because his wig was of that color. Geppetto was very queer. On one hand, I know that queer meant something different back then, but on the other hand, that's tempting me to use a more fabulous voice for Geppetto. Woe to anyone who called him cornmeal. He became suddenly like a beast, and no one could hold him. You know what, let's just try it to see how it goes. Disclaimer, M.V.P.Knight is using this voice for the sake of comedy and does not mean actual offense. "Good morning, Master Antonio," said Geppetto. "What are you doing on the ground?" "I'm teaching the ants their ABCs. "Much good that does." "What has you here, Brother Geppetto?" "My legs. Do you know, Master Antonio, that I have come to ask a favor of you?" "Here I am, prompt to serve you," replied the woodcutter, raising himself on his knees. Did I just read that the woodcutter rose onto his knees, saying that he was prompt to serve the queer woodcutter? Dang, this book was ahead of its time. "This morning, I had an idea." "Let me hear it." "I thought I would make a pretty wooden marionette. I mean, a wonderful marionette. One that can dance, walk, and jump. And this marionette I wish to travel through the world and earn for myself a little bread. What do you think of it?" "Very good, cornmeal," cried the same little voice. How does Pinocchio even know that's what people call Geppetto? On hearing himself called cornmeal, Brother Geppetto became as red as a pepper with rage, and turning toward the woodcutter, said to him furiously, "Why do you offend me?" "Oh no, you didn't." "Who has offended you?" "You have called me cornmeal." "I did not." "I say you did." "No." "Yes." "No." "Yes." And becoming more angry, they finally came to blows. They scratched, bit, and rumpled each other, and seized each other by the hair. At the end of the struggle, Master Antonio found in his hands the wig of Geppetto, and Geppetto noticed that he had the speckled wig of the woodcutter in his mouth. "Give me my wig," cried Master Antonio. "Then give mine, and let us make peace." The old men, after having returned their wigs, shook hands and swore to remain good friends all their lives. Oh, is that how you make friends? You challenge them to fights and then you make up afterwards? I gotta try that sometime. Peace having been restored, the woodcutter said, "What then, Brother Geppetto, can I do for you?" "I should like a piece of wood to make a marionette. Will you give it to me?" Master Antonio gladly took up the piece of wood that had frightened him so. But when he was about to hand it to Geppetto, the piece of wood gave a spring, and slipping violently from his hands, fell and struck the shins of poor Geppetto. "Ah! You are very polite when you give presents. Truly, Master Antonio, you have nearly lamed me." "I swear I did not try to do it." "Then I did it?" "The fault is all on this piece of wood." "I know that, but it was you who threw it at my legs." "I did not throw it." "Storyteller." "Geppetto, do not offend me, or I will call you cornmeal." "Mule." "Cornmeal." "Ass." "Cornmeal." "Ugly monkey." "Cornmeal." Hearing himself called cornmeal for the third time, Geppetto lost control of himself. He approached the woodcutter and gave him a blow. Did I just read that the queer woodcutter gave him a blow? When the battle was ended, Master Antonio found 2 scratches on his nose, and Geppetto a few buttons less on his jacket. They again shook hands and swore to remain good friends for all the rest of their lives. Geppetto took up the piece of wood in his arms and, thanking Master Antonio, went home limping all the way. There's not too much to these first 2 chapters, but I think I forced it to be humorous well enough. One more chapter. Chapter 3. Geppetto's room consisted of one room on the ground floor. It received light from a window under a staircase. The furniture could not have been more simple. A broken chair, a poor bed, and a nearly ruined table. On one of the partitions, there was a fireplace with wood burning. Perhaps it was Pinocchio's cousin. But the fire was painted, and above it there was also painted a boiling pot with clouds of steam all around it that made it quite real. As soon as he entered, Geppetto began to make a marionette. "What name shall I give him?" he said to himself. "I think I will call him Pinocchio. That name will bring with it good fortune. I have known a whole family called Pinocchio. Pinocchio was the father, Pinocchio was the mother, and the children were called little Pinocchios. And everybody lived well. The richest of them begged." When he had found the name for the marionette, he began to work with a will. He quickly made the forehead, then the hair, and then the eyes. After he had made the eyes, just imagine how surprised he was to see them look around, and finally gaze at him fixedly. Geppetto, seeing himself looked at by 2 eyes of wood, said to the head, "Why do you look at me so, eyes of wood?" No response. After he had made the eyes, he made the nose. But the nose began to grow, and it grew, until it became a great big nose, and Geppetto thought it would never stop. He tried hard to stop it, but the more he cut at it, the longer that impertinent nose became. After the nose, he made the mouth. The mouth was hardly finished when it commenced to sing and laugh. "Stop laughing," said Geppetto, vexed, but it was like talking to the wall. "Stop laughing, I repeat it," he said again in a loud tone. Then the mouth stopped laughing and stuck out its tongue. Geppetto, in order not to notice the impertinence, feigned not to see it and continued to work. After the mouth, he made the chin, then the neck, then the shoulders, then the body, then the arms and hands. Hardly had he finished the hands when Geppetto felt his wig pulled off. He quickly turned, and what do you think he saw? He saw his yellow wig in the hands of the marionette. "Pinocchio, give me back my wig immediately," he said. But Pinocchio, instead of giving him back the wig, put it on his own head, making himself look half smothered. At this insolence, Geppetto looked sad and melancholy, a thing he had never done before in his life, and turning to Pinocchio said, "Bad little boy, you are not yet finished and already lack respect to your father. Bad, bad boy." And he dried a tear. There was now only the legs and feet to make. When Geppetto had finished them, he felt a kick on the end of his nose. "I deserved it," he said to himself. "I ought to have thought of this at first. Now it is too late." Then he took the marionette in his arms and placed him on the ground to make him walk. Pinocchio behaved at first as if his legs were asleep and he could not move them. Geppetto led him around the room for some time, showing him how to put one foot in front of the other. When his legs were stretched, Pinocchio began to walk and then to run round the room. When he saw the door open, he jumped into the street and ran away. Poor Geppetto ran as fast as he could, but he was not able to catch him. Pinocchio jumped like a rabbit. He made a noise with his wooden feet on the hard road, like 20 pairs of little wooden shoes. Stop him, cried Geppetto. But the people in the street, seeing the wooden marionette running as fast as a rabbit, stopped to look at it and laughed and laughed and laughed, so that it is really hard to describe how they enjoyed it. Finally, through good fortune, a soldier appeared, who, hearing all the noise, thought that some colt had escaped from its master. He planted himself in the middle of the road, and, with a fixed look, determined to catch the runaway. Pinocchio, when he saw the soldier in the road, tried to pass between his legs, but he could not do it. The soldier, scarcely moving his body, seized the marionette by the nose, which was a very ridiculous one, just the size to be seized by a soldier. and consigning him to the hands of Geppetto, who tried to correct him by pulling his ears. But just imagine, when he searched for the ears, he could not find them. Do you know why? Because in his haste of making Pinocchio, he did not finish carving them. Then Geppetto took him by the neck, and while he led him back, said, shaking him, "Wait until we get home, and I will give you a whipping." Pinocchio, at this threat, called Child Protective Services. No, I'm kidding. Pinocchio, at this threat, threw himself on the ground and refused to walk farther. Meanwhile, the curious people and the loungers began to stop and surround them. First one said something, then another. "Poor Marionette," said one of them. "He is right not to want to go back to his home. Who knows how hard Geppetto beats him?" And others added maliciously that Geppetto appears a kind man, but he is a true tyrant with boys. I didn't expect this time period to react appropriately to that whipping comment. If he gets that poor Marionette in his hands, he will break him in pieces. Altogether, they made so much noise that the soldier gave Pinocchio back his liberty and took to prison instead that poor old man who, not finding words at first with which to defend himself, wept like a calf, and approaching the prison stammered out, "Wicked son! And to think I tried so hard to make a good marionette. I ought to have thought of all this at first." Well, that's a great happy ending. Pinocchio probably found some good parents after that, and Geppetto was probably executed for even thinking about whipping a child, and they all lived happily ever. What happened afterwards is a story so strange that you will hardly believe it. However, I will tell it to you in the following chapters. So that was the first 3 chapters of the original Pinocchio. If you liked this, I have finished audiobooks of the original Winnie the Pooh and The House at Pooh Corner. Those books are much more hilarious than you would expect them to be. They nearly drowned him by dropping a rock on him, then they said, "Well done." That was a great idea. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and not be offended by the fabulous voice.